From a lifeguard who used his looks to manipulate everyone around him to a police chief whose rage nearly destroyed his relationships. In this video, we're breaking down how 7 characters from Stranger Things perfectly embody the 7 deadly sins. These aren't just bad people making mistakes. These are characters whose defining traits mirror humanity's oldest moral failings, showing us that monsters don't just come from the upside down. First up, we got lust. Billy Hargrove's obsession with desire. Billy Hargrove embodied lust through his constant use of sexuality to manipulate others, his objectification of women, and his pursuit of physical pleasure above all else. Billy moved to Hawkins in 1984 from California and immediately established himself as the new alpha male at Hawkins High. He worked as a lifeguard at Hawkins Community Pool in 1985, where he constantly flirted with older women, most notably Karen Wheeler, Mike's mother. Billy showed up to his lifeguard shifts specifically to attract female attention, positioning himself where women could see his physique. He arranged to meet Karen at a motel for an affair before being possessed by the Mind Flayer. Throughout Season 2, Billy called high school girls cows when they ogled him, showing his disdain for female peers while actively pursuing sexual attention from adult women. His charm and physical attractiveness were weapons he used deliberately. When confronted by his abusive father Neil about his behavior, Billy's defense mechanism was to lean into his sexuality and rebellious image even harder. Billy treated desire like a tool for control rather than genuine connection. His constant pursuit of sexual attention masked deeper pain from his abusive childhood, but that doesn't excuse how he weaponized his looks and charm. Working as a lifeguard wasn't about the job. It was about putting himself on display.
The way he pursued Karen Wheeler showed zero regard for her marriage or family. He didn't care about consequences. When he flirted with women at the pool, he wasn't looking for relationships. He was collecting validation. The fact that he called teenage girls cows while enjoying adult women's lust for him revealed his twisted relationship with desire. He wanted to be wanted, but he had contempt for anyone who actually wanted him unless they fit his criteria. His father's abuse taught him that vulnerability was weakness. So Billy buried his pain under layers of sexual conquest and physical intimidation.
Before we continue, if you're enjoying this breakdown of Hawkins' darkest character traits, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Billy's lust was obvious, but the next sin runs even deeper in Hawkins. Wrath, Jim Hopper's uncontrollable rage. Jim Hopper's defining characteristic across seasons 2 and 3 was his violent, uncontrollable anger that he directed at everyone around him, especially the people he claimed to love. In Season 1, Hopper was introduced as a grieving father who lost his daughter Sarah to cancer and his marriage to divorce. He turned to alcohol and pills to numb his pain. In Season 2, after adopting Eleven, Hopper kept her isolated in his cabin for 6 months. When she disobeyed him to see her friends, Hopper exploded in rage, screaming at her, threatening to send her back to Hawkins' lab, and comparing himself to Dr. Brenner when she called him Papa. He ripped the cabin's television wires out and banged violently on her locked door. In Season 3, Hopper's anger intensified. He threatened Mike Wheeler, telling the teenage boy he would never see Eleven again if Mike didn't stay away from her. He invented the 3-inch rule to control their relationship. When Joyce stood him up for dinner because she was investigating magnets, Hopper lashed out with jealous rage, yelling at her in front of others and acting possessive. He physically assaulted Mayor Klein, threatening him with violence to get information. He destroyed property, punched walls, and used his position as police chief to intimidate anyone who frustrated him. Hopper's grief over losing Sarah didn't give him permission to terrorize everyone around him. Threatening a 14-year-old boy because you can't handle your adopted daughter dating is abusive behavior disguised as fatherly protection. The way he screamed at Eleven in Season 2, threatening to send her back to the lab where she'd been tortured, showed how his anger overrode his love. That's not protection, that's control through fear. Season 3 made it worse. Hopper's jealousy when Joyce showed interest in investigating strange phenomena instead of focusing on their dinner plans revealed how self-centered his rage was. He didn't care that Joyce was trying to save Hawkins. He cared that she wasn't paying attention to him. The physical violence he used against Mayor Klein and others showed a man who solved every problem with intimidation and fists. Hopper's trauma from Vietnam and losing his daughter was real, but trauma doesn't justify terrorizing people who love you. His wrath nearly cost him every meaningful relationship he had. Drop a comment and let me know. Have you ever dealt with someone whose anger controlled their life? While Hopper's wrath destroyed his relationships, our next character's pride did the same damage in a different way. Pride, Steve Harrington's fall from King Steve. In Season 1, Steve Harrington embodied pride through his obsession with popularity, status, and maintaining his image as King Steve of Hawkins High. Steve was introduced in 1983 as Nancy Wheeler's boyfriend and the most popular student at Hawkins High. He was best friends with Tommy Hagen and Carol Perkins, two cruel bullies who mocked anyone outside their social circle. Steve threw parties at his parents' house, where he pressured Nancy to drink. When Steve saw Jonathan Byers taking photos near his house, he discovered Jonathan had accidentally photographed Nancy undressing. Steve's response was to break Jonathan's camera and publicly humiliate him. Later, when Steve thought Nancy was cheating on him with Jonathan, he didn't communicate or ask questions. Instead, he and his friends spray-painted "Nancy the Slut Wheeler" on the movie theater marquee to destroy her reputation. Steve's entire identity revolved around being the popular jock. He cared more about his image and what others thought than about genuine relationships. Even his relationship with Nancy initially seemed based on her being another status symbol. When Barb Holland went missing from Steve's pool party, his first concern wasn't finding her. His first concern was keeping quiet so his parents wouldn't find out about the party. King Steve's pride made him cruel. Breaking Jonathan's camera was about asserting dominance over someone Steve saw as beneath him socially. The spray paint incident revealed how quickly pride turns vindictive when threatened. Steve didn't verify if Nancy actually cheated. He just assumed and immediately tried to ruin her reputation to protect his own ego. His friendship with Tommy and Carol was built entirely on maintaining social hierarchy. They weren't real friends. They were accessories to his status. The fact that Steve's first thought after Barb's disappearance was protecting his reputation instead of helping find a missing girl showed how warped his priorities were. Pride told Steve that being King Steve mattered more than being a good person. Fortunately, Steve eventually recognized this sin and spent the next 3 seasons actively fighting against it, becoming one of Hawkins's genuine heroes. But Season 1 Steve was pure pride wrapped in a varsity jacket. Steve learned to overcome his pride.
But our next character never learned that lesson.
Greed. Dr. Martin Brenner's hunger for power. Dr. Martin Brenner's entire existence centered on greed. His insatiable desire to possess, control, and exploit psychic children for his own scientific advancement and power. Brenner was a researcher for the U.S. Department of Energy and directed operations at Hawkins National Laboratory from the 1950s through 1983. In 1959, he took custody of 12-year-old Henry Creel after Henry killed his mother and sister using psychokinetic powers. Brenner designated Henry as Subject 001, tattooed him, and implanted a chip called Soteria in his neck to suppress his abilities. Brenner then forced Henry to work as an orderly, while periodically ordering other staff to torture him. Brenner's real goal was replicating Henry's powers. He created Project Indigo, giving pregnant women experimental drugs and sensory deprivation while transfusing them with Henry's blood. When these women gave birth, Brenner stole their babies, including Terry Ives's daughter Jane, later known as 11. He created at least 18 numbered child test subjects. Brenner raised these children in isolation, calling himself Papa, while subjecting them to physically and emotionally draining experiments. He electrocuted children who disobeyed him, as seen with Subjects 1 and 2. He kept the children locked in Hawkins' lab with no access to the outside world, treating them as research specimens rather than human beings. When Terry Ives tried to get her daughter back, Brenner ordered forceful electroshock therapy that left Terry in a permanent catatonic state. Brenner didn't experiment on children to help them or society. He did it to own their power. Every child in that lab was property to him, a resource to exploit. He stole babies from their mothers, erased their identities, and replaced their names with numbers tattooed on their arms. That's not science. That's slavery, dressed in a lab coat. The way he manipulated these children into calling him Papa while torturing them showed calculated psychological abuse. He wanted their love and their obedience, extracting both through terror and manipulation. Brenner's greed extended beyond just wanting powers for himself. He wanted complete control over anyone with abilities. That's why he suppressed Henry's powers for 20 years, while forcing him to watch younger children suffer through the same experiments.
Brenner hoarded knowledge, hoarded power, and hoarded children. When children tried to escape or disobey, he destroyed them or their families. Terry Ives ended up brain dead because she threatened Brenner's control over his stolen collection. In Season 4, even after the 1979 massacre, Brenner's first instinct was finding 11 to regain control over her. His greed never died because he never saw these children as people. He saw them as things he owned. Brenner's greed was calculated and controlled, but the next sin was pure, mindless hunger. Gluttony. The Demogorgon's insatiable hunger. The Demogorgon from Season 1 embodied gluttony through its endless, mindless consumption of victims, driven purely by insatiable hunger rather than survival needs. The Demogorgon was a predatory humanoid creature from the Upside Down, a parallel dimension that opened at Hawkins National Laboratory on November 6, 1983. When Dr. Brenner ordered 11 to make psychic contact with the creature, she found it feeding on large yellow eggs in the void. The contact created a gate between dimensions, allowing the Demogorgon to enter Hawkins. For approximately 1 week, the creature terrorized the town, abducting residents and dragging them into the Upside Down. The Demogorgon's first victim was an unnamed Hawkins lab scientist, caught while trying to operate an elevator during the initial breach. On November 6th,
It stalked Will Byers on Mirkwood Road while he rode his bike home from the Wheeler house, abducting him into the Upside Down.
that same night at Steve Harrington's pool party, the Demogorgon was attracted to Barbara Holland when she cut her hand on a diving board. The creature pulled Barb through a temporary gate at the bottom of the pool and killed her. Over the following days, the Demogorgon hunted a deer in the woods, leaving its partially eaten corpse. It killed 2 hunters named Henry and Dale. It also killed at least 5 other unnamed Hawkins residents. The creature appeared drawn to blood like a shark, but also attacked victims without blood present, including Joyce Byers. The Demogorgon captured some victims alive rather than eating them immediately, implanting them with slug-like larvae through tendrils down their throats. Will Byers was found in the Upside Down with one of these tendrils extending into his mouth. The creature moved between dimensions at will, creating temporary portals or gates in reality. When it hunted, it caused the lights to flicker and electronics to malfunction through electromagnetic disruption. The Demogorgon was finally destroyed by 11 on November 12, 1983, at Hawkins Middle School, but not before it killed Agent Shepard and injured several others. In total, the creature killed at least 11 people in 1 week. The Demogorgon wasn't hunting for survival. It was consuming beyond any biological need. 11 witnessed it feeding on eggs in the void before it ever entered Hawkins, meaning it wasn't starving. The moment it gained access to the human world, it immediately began killing and consuming. That's not hunger, that's gluttony. The creature attacked isolated victims constantly, never satisfied, always seeking more. When it hunted the deer in the woods, it only partially ate the carcass before moving on to human prey. That's excess consumption. The Demogorgon didn't need to kill 11 people in 7 days.
No predator requires that much food.
It killed Barb Holland at Steve's pool, then killed 2 hunters the same night, then continued hunting additional victims. That's mindless consumption, driven by insatiable appetite rather than necessity. The fact that the creature sometimes captured victims alive to implant them with larvae showed its hunger extended beyond immediate feeding. It was creating more food sources, ensuring constant consumption. The Demogorgon represented pure gluttony because it existed solely to consume. It had no other motivation, no other purpose. Where a normal predator kills to survive, the Demogorgon killed because its appetite could never be satisfied. It crossed dimensional barriers specifically to access new sources of consumption. That's the essence of gluttony. Never being satisfied with what you have, always needing more, consuming beyond reason or need. The Demogorgon's hunger was endless, but our next character's apathy runs just as deep. Sloth, Ted Wheeler's willful ignorance. Ted Wheeler embodied sloth through his complete detachment from his family, his refusal to engage with the chaos happening in Hawkins, and his deliberate choice to remain passive while his children fought for their lives. Ted Wheeler was Mike and Nancy's father, married to Karen Wheeler, with 3 children including youngest daughter Holly. He worked a high-paying job that earned 6 figures according to Jonathan Byers. Throughout seasons 1 through 4, Ted remained perpetually glued to his recliner, reading newspapers and falling asleep in front of the television. In season 1, when government agents from Hawkins' lab came to his house looking for 11, Ted passively allowed them to search without question. When Mike's friends gathered constantly at the Wheeler house for emergency meetings about Will's disappearance, Ted complained, but never asked why. In season 2, Ted remained oblivious to Nancy's investigation into Barb's death
and Mike's involvement with 11. Season 3 showed Ted at the community pool, while his wife Karen developed an intense attraction to lifeguard Billy Hargrove. Karen prepared for an affair, getting dressed to meet Billy at a motel. She only stopped when she saw Ted asleep in his recliner with Holly. Ted never noticed his wife's near betrayal. When the Mind Flayer attacked Hawkins and Starcourt Mall exploded, Ted accepted the government's cover story about a mall fire. In Season 4, Ted attended the town hall meeting about the murders, sitting with his lap loaded with donuts, while Jason Carver accused the Hellfire Club of being satanic murderers. Ted's own son Mike was a Hellfire Club member, but Ted showed minimal concern. When the kids went missing, Ted suggested throwing them in jail to make them talk. 2 days after gates opened and Hawkins became destroyed, Ted sat in his chair watching news coverage, calling it an earthquake. Ted wasn't just uninvolved. He actively chose ignorance. Sloth isn't laziness. It's the refusal to care, the deliberate avoidance of responsibility. Ted had every opportunity to exchange with his family and chose not to. His daughter was investigating a murder. His son was harboring a psychic girl from a government laboratory. His wife was planning adultery. His town was under interdimensional attack. Ted noticed none of it because he didn't want to notice. When government agents searched his house, any engaged parent would have demanded answers. Ted let it happen. Season 3 revealed the depth of Ted's apathy when Karen almost had an affair and Ted remained oblivious. He watched his wife dress up and leave multiple times. He noticed nothing because noticing would require effort. During the town hall meeting, with his son accused of being part of a murderous cult, Ted's primary action was eating donuts. When he suggested jailing the kids,
It showed he'd rather have someone else deal with the problem. Even after Hawkins was torn apart by gates to another dimension, Ted sat in his recliner watching TV. The town was destroyed. His children were missing. Reality had cracked open. Ted chose to watch the news call it an earthquake. Everyone in Hawkins knew something supernatural was happening. Ted chose to accept the lie because acknowledging reality would require action.
while Ted Wheeler chose apathy over action, Will Byers couldn't stop watching what everyone else had: envy. Will Byers' jealousy of lost childhood. Will Byers spent seasons 3 and 4 consumed by envy as he watched his friends grow up, get girlfriends, and leave behind the childhood activities Will desperately wanted to preserve. In season 3, set in summer 1985, all of Will's friends entered romantic relationships. Mike dated 11, Lucas dated Max Mayfield, and Dustin had a girlfriend named Susie from summer camp. Will was the only one without a romantic partner. He tried repeatedly to organize Dungeons & Dragons campaigns, but his friends kept canceling or showing disinterest because they wanted to spend time with their girlfriends. During one attempted D&D session, Mike and Lucas were so distracted that Will snapped, cut the campaign short, and stormed out into the rain. Mike followed him and they argued, with Mike yelling, "It's not my fault you don't like girls." Will didn't deny it. Later that night, Will destroyed Castle Byers, the fort he'd built with Jonathan, symbolically destroying his childhood because he realized he couldn't hold on to it anymore. In season 4, after moving to California, Will watched Mike send dozens of letters to 11, while Will only received a few phone calls. Will spent spring break as a third wheel, watching Mike and 11 act like a couple while he followed behind them. Will created a painting for Mike, but hid it because it revealed his feelings. When Mike and 11 fought, Will defended 11's perspective to Mike, but it was clear Will was also speaking about his own unrequited feelings. Will's envy wasn't about wanting what his friends had, it was about resenting what he'd lost. Watching Mike kiss 11 while Will stood alone at the airport in season 4 showed the isolation envy creates. Mike didn't even hug Will back properly. That's what envy does. It makes you notice every moment you're not included, every relationship you're outside of, every experience you're not having. Will tried to force his friends back into childhood with D&D because he couldn't accept that they were moving forward while he felt stuck. The destroyed Castle Byers was Will literally smashing his past because envy convinced him that if he couldn't have his old life back, he'd rather destroy it than watch it fade. Season 4 made Will's envy more explicit. He was jealous of 11's relationship with Mike, jealous of the letters Mike sent her, jealous that Mike was oblivious to Will's feelings. Will's painting represented everything he wanted to say, but couldn't, because he envied 11's ability to openly love Mike, while Will had to hide his feelings. Envy told Will that he'd always be on the outside looking in, watching his friends live lives he couldn't have. Will's envy isolated him from the people he loved most.
And these sins remind us that Hawkins's real monsters often look human. Stranger Things shows us that evil doesn't just come from alternate dimensions. Billy Hargrove used lust to control others and mask his pain. Jim Hopper's wrath nearly destroyed everyone he loved. Steve Harrington's pride made him cruel before he learned to change. Dr. Brenner's greed turned children into experiments and stole their humanity. Will Byers' envy poisoned his friendships and kept him isolated. These aren't cartoon villains from the Upside Down. They're people whose sins consumed them. Billy's lust for validation through sexuality reflected his abusive childhood. Hopper's wrath stemmed from grief and PTSD that he refused to address healthily. Steve's pride was built on insecurity about his worth beyond popularity. Brenner's greed came from a belief that power and knowledge justified any atrocity. Will's envy emerged from trauma that left him unable to move forward with his friends. The 7 deadly sins work as a framework because they identify universal human failings. Lust reduces people to objects. Wrath destroys relationships through uncontrolled anger. Pride elevates status over genuine connection. Greed treats people as possessions. Envy poisons you with resentment over what others have. Every character in Hawkins faces supernatural threats, but their real battles are against their own worst impulses. Billy had to fight the Mind Flayer and his own demons before sacrificing himself. Hopper had to recognize his wrath was driving away Joyce and Eleven. Steve had to abandon his pride to become a genuine hero. Brenner never overcame his greed and died still trying to control Eleven. Will continues struggling with envy as he watches life pass him by. Stranger Things reminds us that monsters wear human faces. The Demogorgon was terrifying, but Billy's manipulation was calculated. Vecna tortured his victims, but Brenner tortured children for decades. The Mind Flayer possessed people, but Hopper's rage possessed him from within. These characters show how sins escalate. Lust starts as attraction and becomes manipulation. Wrath begins as justified anger and becomes abuse. Pride appears as confidence and morphs into cruelty. Greed looks like ambition and ends in exploitation. Envy feels like longing and turns into isolation. The difference between Hawkins' heroes and villains isn't whether they feel these impulses, it's whether they let these sins define them. Steve felt pride but learned humility. Hopper felt wrath but learned control. Billy felt lust but found redemption through sacrifice. Will feels envy but hasn't let it destroy his capacity for love. Only Brenner never changed, and he died alone in the desert, still grasping for power. Understanding the 7 deadly sins in Stranger Things characters helps us recognize these patterns in ourselves. When we use sexuality to control others like Billy, when we lash out in anger like Hopper, when we care more about image than truth like Steve, when we treat people as resources like Brenner, when we resent others' happiness like Will. The Upside Down is fictional. These sins are real. And Stranger Things shows that overcoming them requires acknowledging them, confronting them, and choosing to be better despite them. If you enjoyed this breakdown of Stranger Things' deadliest character flaws, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video.